technical difficulty tonight. How's everyone doing? Good. Okay. So we have embarked on this series of talks on the four great vows of the Bodhisattva. But I have chosen to elaborate on this from the perspective of what is called the practice of the 15 minds. And we finished the first four, which is 4 methods of attraction of Bodhisattva. And they are, you remember them?
Generosity is one.
Generosity is the first one.
Kind speech.
Kind speech, very good.
And actions.
Good beneficial action. And
Sangha, community sangha, right?
practicing with sentient beings. Right? So whatever they're doing, you're doing it with them. So these are the 4 methods of attraction. Once sentient beings are in close proximity, they're drawn to you, then you can go in for the kill. So then you attracting them through generosity, kind speech, practicing along with them, beneficial action. Then you can really work on their minds and heart. And that's what we have tonight. It's called the 4 immeasurable or boundless hearts. Sometimes they're called boundless abidings. And the Sanskrit is Brahma Vihara. But it's probably different than the Brahma Vihara that you've heard before. Usually, at least in the English language, right? The 4 Brahma Viharas are usually taught in the context of Theravada Buddhism. And they are loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Now, in the Theravada, lesser vehicle, I'm going to call that, not in a sense, in a pejorative sense, lesser means focusing on individual salvation, individual liberation, as opposed to universal liberation for all beings. So applying these practices to all sentient beings. So in the lesser vehicle, particularly these teachings are scattered throughout different early scriptures. But it is in the commentary tradition, the Abhidharma tradition, that's organized these 4 practices as a set, as a particular way of practicing. And so in the Abhidharma literature, these 4 are auxiliary practices, meaning they're supports. They're not placed as the main practice for liberation. The main practices for liberation are rested on the practice of shamatha vipassana. ultimately on the Vipassana practice, which is contemplation of selflessness, contemplation of liberation through impermanence. So impermanence from a temporal perspective and selflessness from a spatial perspective. Okay. So these auxiliary practices aim to prime the practitioner ready for these more advanced practices. So in the Abhidharma literature, they're placed as a secondary practices. The cultivation of loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, because they really don't lead to liberation. They prepare the practitioner for more advanced practices. So in the Abhidharma literature, these four are said as the accomplishment of these four actually reaches the formless realm, or the form realm, or the formless realm in meditation practices. So that's the lesser vehicle, or the early Buddhist teachings. The Mahayana teachings, or the great vehicle, universal liberation teachings, they are actually part of the Bodhisattva path. And they are grounded in liberation. So we could say it's drastically different. The orientation of these four practices are, you could say, very different. The Bodhisattva, as you all know, aims for Buddhahood as opposed to just liberation. So liberation, the key ingredient is to dismantle self-referential attachment that manifests as greed, hatred, ignorance, what is called the three poisons. So in order to dismantle them, you really don't need to cultivate compassion. It's tangential, you see. You don't need to cultivate loving kindness. You don't really need to cultivate kind speech. You uphold the precepts, but it's the three poisons that's the core of the problem. Now, in the Mahayana tradition, because the aim is for Buddhahood, this means dismantling the three poisons is insufficient. And this comes to the difference between a Buddha, which is also an arhat, it's just a fully awakened arhat with full potential, and an ordinary arhat. So in the early literature, you can clearly see some of the arhats that still have residues of kind of character flaws. Why is that? Some of them are impatient. They have the wisdom to liberate themselves, but they are impatient. There's this other arhat that has a tendency of scolding people. Yeah. There's another arhat. Actually, the first ancestral teacher, Mahakashyapa. His issue is because he have cultivated his practices asceticism, number one. So he has cultivated this particular, through lifetimes, this tendency to be aloof from people. In other words, he's inapproachable, stern, disciplined, and aloof from people. So in these early texts, you clearly see both the Vinaya and also the Nikayas or the Agamas. You clearly see through the different interactions with Buddha and the disciples and their own interaction with lay people, non-Buddhist as well, that they're clearly not perfected beings, clearly, unlike the Buddha. So the Buddha has practiced for innumerable eons, perfecting all the qualities of what a human being is capable of. So we call that the paramitas. We'll get to that in this text, this talk. So hence, you don't see the Buddha having any character traits flawed. You see the perfection not only of personality, but of his wisdom. Wisdom, not the fundamental wisdom of liberation, but the wisdom of skillful means in identifying the strengths and shortcomings of sentient beings and is able to decisively, with precision, give the teachings to that particular sentient being so that they become liberated. Instead of just, like shooting darts in the dark, whatever teachings land, the Buddha is able to discern with his acquired wisdom of skillful means what sentient beings actually need. What is their karmic disposition, tendency, which led to what they are now? So what they naturally gravitate to, and then the Buddha will give the teaching to that. So that is something unique to Buddhahood. And for that reason, all the basic early Buddhist teachings, the so-called secondary or auxiliary supporting practices become very prominent, become central to the Bodhisattva path. So the 15 minds that I'm using to flesh out the 4 great vows can all be found in the early text, all of them. But it's only through the Mahayana reorganization, you could call it, that places them into central role, grounded in the teaching of emptiness. And that is the key, the teaching of emptiness. Part of the 15 minds, the teaching of emptiness, is elaborated later, the last three gates of liberation, which will fully unpack that later. But here we can just understand it as the 15 minds, grounded in emptiness. And that's very important, very important. Because in order to become a Buddha, your vow is to interact with all kinds of sentient beings, all kinds of people, to bring it down from the clouds, to relate to people. And we all know how difficult it is to relate to people. right? The perfection of patience, for example, which is the general Bodhisattva kind of pillar practice. Pillar to actually tonight's topic, the four immeasurable, boundless hearts. Cannot be perfected without annoying people, right? Cannot be perfected without difficulties, without people who are very stubborn. You see? So the only way for the Bodhisattva practitioner to not be exhausted, what is that called? Burnout? Right? This common term means socially engaged Buddhism. We have to avoid burnouts. Can you turn up the light up? You're brighter. That's a major problem. And the only way to prevent burnout is to see sentient beings as empty. As empty. Which is completely different than how we normally relate to ourselves, other people, and the world. And this gets to the main core of our sentience, the fundamental grasping of everything as real, separate, permanent. We can even grasp emptiness as real, permanent, as a thing separate, something to attain, something to realize. So this is the fundamental problem. We make everything into a thing. We reify and solidify everything. And that is exhausting. That's actually the core of exhaustion. The selfing and othering. We're trying to promote, for example, equity, inclusion. What's the D stand for? Diversity. Diversity. And then we have these obstacles. We have these people who's promoting just the opposite. And maybe they're in position of power. So it's like this losing battle. And we feel exhausted. And the reason why we feel exhausted is because, neurologically speaking, your amygdala is perceiving threat, fight or flight, for something that's other, this obstacle. But the perception of threat is a construct created by, simulated by our brain. And there's a whole lived experience, so history to back that up. Because what you perceive as threat is contingent on your value. They're opposed to my view, our view. And your value is contingent on all the experiences that you've had, all the education, the learning. It's not fixed. If you have different set of experiences, you may hold their view. Do you know what I'm saying? It's completely contingent. It's constructed by different causes and conditions. Right? Moreover, your brain has never existed outside of this skull. Right? So what you're actually perceiving are mental representations based on electrical signals, synaptic neurological signals. You've never actually experienced an opponent outside. Those people that oppose you, they only exist in your construct. They're empty. Right? But because we feel they are so real, and we have this instinctual tendency based on the way that we are actually neurologically wired to have this byproduct of reification, right? Because we need that in our nervous system to survive. Right? Threat, safety. So we're wired to perceive. Even though everything is created by the brain, we're wired to perceive safety and threat, friends and foe, good and bad. It's a kind of byproduct that help us to survive, to navigate through the world. So this byproduct becomes this natural, instinctual in the scare quote sense of the word, because it's not necessarily, it's just byproduct, instinctual sense of reification. So we are actually living in our constructs individually and also collectively, this world that we have created. Through our reification, attachment, these things become real for us. Our values, our enemies, self, other becomes real for us. And that's where the exhaustion comes from. So the Mahayana approach, and this is everywhere. It's not just rhetoric. It's everywhere, beginning in the Prajnaparamita literature. It's in the lesser, the Ashtashrika Saha Sutra, which is the first Prajnaparamita, supposedly, 700 shlokas, to the 100,000 lines, to the Mahaprajnaparamita literature in 600 in the Chinese translation, 600 fascicles, scrolls. Each fascicle has numerous chapters. In the Taisho canon, where the words are like the size of an ant, like a small ant, not fire ant, the big ones, small ant. That's the size of the characters in the Taisho canon. And each one is about this thick. It's like a brick thick. The Mahaprajnaparamita is 3 of these books, 600 fascicles. From the early Prajnaparamita to later Mahayana text, it's everywhere. What am I talking about? That all sentient beings are empty. Thereby, the Bodhisattva generates great compassion to help them. It's a paradox. They're empty. Why should we save them then? You know, it's precisely because they're empty that allows the Bodhisattva to navigate through the difficult terrains of relating to all kinds of people. And in that process, acquiring all the skill sets, all the perfections to save all beings. Obstacles are perceived as opportunities. So the Bodhisattva, you can say, is the ultimate optimist. You know, some people say, I'm not an optimist, I'm a realist. Realists may still reify notions of good and bad, self and others, gaining, losing, having, lacking, grasping, rejecting. Optimist. The optimist sees obstacles as opportunities, sees difficult as great resource, sees all those annoying sentient beings, the unfathomable delusion, unfathomable delusion. I'm laughing because this is a kind of an inside joke at the Chan Center recently. Unfathomable delusion as great resources to perfect patience. Not only patience, all the perfections. To perfect the topic of tonight. We won't finish it because I want to go in some depth about this. The fourfold, boundless hearts, loving kindness. How can you maintain kindness in the face of adversity? You know, if you see them as real, really criticizing you, then you're done. You are done. So their brain is simulating a particular version of you and they're attacking you. That's their brain's versions. Nothing to do with you, actually. Right? You're a jerk. You're a power monger. You abuse people. You take advantage of young people. Right? That's their brain simulated. You see what I'm saying? So if we take that as real, so then what will you try to do? Explain that you're not like that. Exhausting. How can you explain to someone that don't want to listen? How? So you have to use wisdom. Not put yourself in the center of things, but for the sake of the community. Now, did the Buddha scold his disciples? Yes, a lot of times. A lot of times. Some of the things that his disciples did, of course, not our hats, like ordinary monastic, are insane. Like insane. Like, how could they possibly do that? Like, at one time, there are 60 of his disciples. They learned the meditation on impurity. And they wrongly understood this method. and they committed suicide. Now, this appears in different Vinaya text from not only the Theravada, the Dharma-guptaka, the Sarvastivada, the Mula Sarvastivada, the Mahashashika, all these, so you can pretty much tell that it probably happened, you know? And there are other disciples out of their grasping for nirvana, other, driven by their desire, realizing their carnal desire that's still within them as real, chopped off their penises. Cuckoo. You know, the Buddha called them, you idiot. So it doesn't mean that, oh, compassion, loving kindness. No, loving kindness, you can scold people loving kindnessly, you know, in a loving way. So you need wisdom for the sake of the community. Imagine the Buddha said, loving kindness, just let it be. Don't need to defend the Dharma. Don't need to explain. Just whatever their brain comes up, that's theirs. Imagine if you let that happen. The Buddha not explain, repeat himself tirelessly because he's trying to defend himself. He repeated for the sake of the community, the harmony of the community, for the sake of eradicating delusion. This is not correct, you idiot. You cut off the wrong thing. You have to cut off. That's basically the exact words. You have to cut off delusion, not physical parts of your body. So some of the things that, all of these from the Mahayana perspective, bodhisattvas. These bodhisattvas did things wrongly that allow the Buddha to have the occasion to clarify. Right? He even had a disciple, his cousin, one of his cousins, that tried to assassinate him multiple lifetimes. In the present lifetime of the Buddha, 3 times. Right? And in the Mahayana text, all these obstacles, detrimental delusion opportunities. That's why in the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha gave prediction of Devadatta, the cousin that tried to assassinate him. Future Buddhahood. Because of that aversion, lifetime after lifetime, presenting obstacles that has propelled the Buddha to perfect his paramitas. Without Devadatta, the Buddha would not have reached Buddhahood. So that is the merit of Devadatta. You see? So this kind of inversion. So all the supplementary practices, the secondary, not really important practices in the early text, in the Mahayana, becomes turned around into precisely all the means to actually realize Buddhahood. So, does that make sense? And the only way to do that without exhaustion is to contemplate emptiness of self and others. And the transactions between your relationship between sentient beings. That's called the three emptinesses: self, others, and transaction or interaction. And there's many different ways. There's like 18 different kind of emptiness. Buddhism has a lot of these kind of numbers, the 3 of this, 4 of that, 8 of this, 6 of this. Different ways of dividing. All of these are basically skillful means. But the most important thing is actually emptiness. That will save you from being exhausted. And while at the same time fully engaged, can dive into the sea of delusion and suffering and still come out okay. Still come out all right for the Bodhisattva. And when you perfect that, you come out as the Buddha. So I want to spend some time elaborating on emptiness. Okay? But let me explain the 4 immeasurable lines. So first one, loving kindness. And basically translated the passage from the Mahasamatha Vipassana by Zhi Yi, Mohe Zhiguan. This is in the 7th fascicle. So let me read this passage. If one becomes attached to anger and hatred, one should cultivate loving kindness as the remedy. Granted, the perfection of supreme patience is the general treatment, but in this context, the immeasurable mind of loving kindness should be clarified. The other 3 minds involve sympathetic joy and so forth. So forth means compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. As for the immeasurable compassion as antidote, when contemplating the deep suffering of sentient beings, one generates pity and empathy, wishing to remove their suffering. Focusing on this mind and reflecting on it, it's possible to enter into samadhi in correspondence with compassion. Loving kindness means reflecting on sentient beings attaining happiness. Focusing on this mind, it's possible for one to enter samadhi in correspondence with loving kindness. The joyful, sympathetic mind means reflecting on sentient beings attaining happiness and generating great joy from that. Focusing on this fact, enter into samadhi in correspondence with joy. The equanimous mind means abandoning thoughts of love and hatred, which is self-refuge, and abiding in the contemplation of equality. Focusing on this mind, one enters samadhi of corresponding equanimity. One who attains these 4 samadhis will have no basis from which anger towards any sentient beings can possibly arise. So here, let me talk about the 4 immeasurable minds first, and then I'll focus in on that emptiness part. So, loving kindness from this text, this passage, deals with happiness. This is something very distinct in Buddhism. It's true for the Abhidharma, commentarial tradition of early Buddhism, also for Mahayana Buddhism. Loving kindness generates or focuses on happiness of sentient beings. What is compassion? Compassion is also very specific. Compassion means removing the suffering of sentient beings. So these two has to work in tandem. You can't just focus on removing the suffering of sentient beings. You have to also focus on bestowing happiness, creating the circumstances for their happiness. Nor can you just focus on their happiness and all the causes and consequences of their suffering is still there. You have to remove that. Does that make sense? So once these two are removed, then you have sympathetic joy. Joy from what? Joy that comes from having removed causes of suffering and having generated happiness, true happiness. So happiness from this context is not an ordinary happiness. It will be happiness from alleviation of their vexations. So the vexation is the crux. Removing vexations generates happiness. Removing vexations removes the cause of suffering. So vexation is the hinge, like the door hinge. It's the cause and the effect of loving kindness and compassion. Having removed that, then one generates sympathetic joy, true joy. In order to do that, there's a logic to this. In order to remove vexations, in order to generate true joy, you have to cultivate equanimity. And what is the context of equanimity? Love and hate dropped. But that's only one pair as an example. This pair of opposites, of duality, is actually the core of our problem. Because love and hate can only happen through self-referential habits and perceptions. See, I love, I hate. There's a reference point, you see? And that reference point is self-grasping, selfing. When there's selfing, there's definitely other. When there's selfing, there's definitely not only love and hate. There's pick and choose. There's grasping and rejecting. There is like and dislike. There's all kinds of polarities. Does that make sense? So ultimately, in order to bring sentient beings kindness, love, happiness, and to remove their suffering, to bring genuine joy, you have to focus on equanimity. And equanimity here is not just, oh, everything is equanimous. No. Equity, diversity, inclusiveness. The only thing that DEI can actually happen, be realized from the Buddhist perspective, is through selfless wisdom. Selfless wisdom. Otherwise, there will never be equity, inclusiveness, diversity. it's like this room. Only when this room is empty can it actually hold all kinds of furniture. All of you can be in it. Imagine if this room is actually opaque, or one part of this room is something in the center of it, huge, right? There won't be equity. So the emptiness of this room is the only way to accommodate the diverse multitude of sentient beings. It's the only way to accommodate them, means to work with them, not be exhausted, to actually allow beings to flourish, to change, to transform. All of that is due to emptiness. In other words, that equity. So the four immeasurable, boundless heart rests on which one of the four? The last one. Yeah. Selfless equanimity. So, and that is another way from the Mahayana perspective of the teaching of emptiness. So let me go in some of the text to talk about that. For example, the Mahaprajna Paramita, the 600 fascicle text. That's like 3 Taisho volumes. The 598th volume or fascicle talks about the 4 immeasurable minds. And here's my translation. These bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, great accomplished bodhisattvas, having accomplished such purity of mind, although they give rise to immeasurable loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity that pervades all sentient beings, they're able to eliminate the notion of sentient beings. They have to eliminate the notion of sentient beings. They abide without clinging to the notion of sentient beings. And they have no attachment to the 4 divine abodes of Brahmavihara. They have accomplished sublime wisdom and skillful means. Through accomplishing such dharmas, such practices, they're able to practice and perfect the prajna paramita, the transcendent wisdom, without attachment, and swiftly reach its completion, which is whatever. So passages like this, it's everywhere in the Mahayana text. That is the core of the teaching. It's actually, you cannot save people with the notion that there are people to be saved. If there are sentient beings, then there's definitely me who saves them. What a good job I'm doing, right? That kind of selfing and othering, it's exhausting. It's exhausting. And it's founded on complete delusion. So we see emptiness, shunyata. In the Mahayana text, it functions very differently. Because if you trace that word, do a keyword search on emptiness, in early text, like the lesser discourse or the great discourse on emptiness to the main text in the Nikayas, the way they use emptiness is a state of realization. It's a state. And it's a negation. So it's always placed in an apathetic language. Not this, not that. It's devoid of this, devoid of that. In the Mahayana text, it's not, it sounds apathetic, emptiness, right? But actually, it's the basis of all practice. So in other words, it's cataphatic. It's positive. It is because of emptiness that all beings can be saved. All perfections can be acquired. All skillful means are accomplished. So its function is not just negating. Its function is actually flourishing, you can say, or possibilities. That's why, you know how when I explain emptiness, do you remember how I typically frame it, rephrase it? Emptiness is what? Is about what? Relationships. Where's that come from? Mahayana view. And do you remember how I phrase impermanence usually? How I rephrase it? What is it? New beginnings. Because from the Mahayana view, all these apophatic teachings that exist in early teachings, they have the flowering effect of support for all sentient beings. They are possibilities. So emptiness, words like impermanence, what they're really talking about in the Mahayana teachings is about relationships, connections, new beginnings, possibilities. So we have to reorient our view about emptiness. So you have to question your understanding of emptiness. If you still think in terms of negativia, you know, emptiness is not this, is not that, it's void, it's nothing. The Mahayana teaching challenges this view, actually. It's actually possibilities. So when you are relating with difficult situations, you can't close the door on possibilities. How do we close the door? You're a jerk. I can't work with this. You know, this is bad. When you say I can't, the door is closed. You know, the door is closed. What is at work when you say I can't? It's me. I can't. And when your amygdala hears that, it closes the door. That's it. Fight or flight. Run. Do you know that if you, this is what neuroscience say. If you encounter difficulty, instead of saying I can't, if you say, how? That's curious. Your amygdala subsides in the background. Do you know what region of the brain start to be activated? Prefrontal cortex. Now it's problem solving. How? That's curious. Curiosity. In other words, in the Chan tradition, Gong'an, Huatou practice. What do I call that? You remember? The practice of wonderment. That is the genius of the Chan Zen tradition. You encounter a person who practices koan, it never says, oh, I can't. They're actually training and rewiring their brain to say, interesting. What is it? What is it? What is it? If you cultivate this, you're actually activating a particular region of your brain. I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist, but at least this is what they say. The curiosity, the wonderment, that not knowing, that the door is open. In other words, emptiness. What do I mean by that? Possibilities. Does that make sense? So emptiness is not a state, it is a practice. It is a practice. We must ground our being in emptiness when we engage in Bodhisattva practice. Otherwise, you'll get exhausted. Exhausted. How? You encounter butting heads. You say, interesting, curious, and you have to activate. How can I work with this? Right? Then everything becomes manageable. Everything is workable. That's why Chan Master Yunmen says, every day is a good day. He said it. He said those words at a time of great Buddhist persecution in the 9th century. He said that. That's the historical context. It's not a good day by normal everyday standards. The Emperor Wudi was killing monks, arresting them, forcing them into lay life again, laicizing them, melting down Buddhist statues to make weapons, confiscating monasteries to change into, he was a Taoist, to change into Taoist temples. That's what he was doing. So Yunmen said it at that time. Every day is a good day. Why? Because the Bodhisattva. Practice grounded in possibilities. In other words, shunyata, emptiness. When you ground yourself in this, all you see is possibilities, connections, and what? New beginnings. Do you need to scold people? Yes. Sometimes it requires scolding people. Sometimes it requires quarantine the people who are harming others. It's not that civil law is out the window. Apply civil law. This person is engaged in criminal activities. Arrest them. Right? But in your heart, you see possibilities. So you engage in different acts out of compassion. And that's why compassion is actually the flip side of wisdom. It is actually the function of shunyata from the Mahayana perspective. So if we look at, that's Prajna Paramita. If we look at Vimalakirti Sutra, I'll read this and I'll end tonight's talk. Next talk, I'll elaborate on Vimalakirti Sutra. So chapter 7 of Vimalakirti Sutra. Vimalakirti is this great bodhisattva pretending to be sick. So the Buddha would send his disciple to go visit him so that he can teach them, right? And all the bodhisattvas are there to be taught by him as well. So the Buddha, the basic sutra narrative is the Buddha he found out he's sick, asked every one of his disciples, they all don't want to go because sometime or another, Vimalakirti has embarrassed them. Vimalakirti is a layperson at the Buddha's time, but his wisdom transcends the highest of the bodhisattvas. And when it comes to every one of his great disciples and all the bodhisattvas, and when it comes to Manjushri, he's the embodiment of wisdom. The Buddha said, why don't you go visit him? Manjushri says, okay, And then everyone else, it's the Manjushri. It's going to be a showdown. So once Manjushri says, I'm going to visit him, everyone says, we're going. We're not missing this. So Manjushri, the whole text is Manjushri and Vimalakirti having a dialogue and a bantering. So Manjushri in chapter 7 asked Vimalakirti, how do bodhisattvas view sentient beings? How should a bodhisattva practitioner regard people, sentient beings? And here is what Vimalakirti says. Right? He says, as a conjurer looks on the beings he has conjured up, thus the bodhisattva regards sentient beings. As the wise view the moon in the water, or a face or form seen in a mirror, as shimmers of heat in a torrid season, as the echo that follows a cry in a valley, as clouds in the sky, as foam on the water, as bubbles on top of the surface of the water, as a thing no firmer than the trunk of a plantain, no longer lasting than a flash of lightning, as the fifth great element. There's no such thing as the fifth element. There's only 4 elements, right? As the sixth component, skandha. There is no sixth skandha. A seventh sense media. There's no seventh. It's eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. Only 6 senses. 6 senses. As the 13th dependent origination. There's no such thing. There's only 12. As the 19th sense realm. There's only 18 realms. Thus, he regards sentient beings. He goes on, as form in the world of formless, as sprouts from a charred grain, as mistaken views of the body in one who has entered the stream. That leads to the state of arhat. As a re-entering of a womb by one no longer subject to rebirth. As the 3 poisons of greed, anger, ignorance in an arhat. There's no such a thing. As greed, anger, or violation of the precepts in the part of the bodhisattva, who has accepted the birthless nature of all existence, as vestiges of earthly desire in a Buddha, as form seen by a blind person, as the breathing in and out of one immersed in samadhi of utter tranquility, as the tracks of a bird in the sky, as a child born by a barren woman, as earthly desires in a phantom being, as sights in a dream after one has woken up, as the taking on of bodily form by one who has entered extinction, as fire that has no smoke. Thus, the bodhisattva regard living beings. In other words, there are these metaphors, parables that we can use in our visualization, engagement with sentient beings. Like looking at the image in a mirror, like the form seen in a blind man. All of these things, like the conjurer of a living creature from what he has conjured. This directly relates to what I said about neuroscience, right? Whatever you see, hear, sense, touch, feel, thought of, has never left your skull. Whatever you think is actually out there, you have conjured up. It's your brain that's actually simulated like a mental representation of what you're actually seeing. That's how you should relate to sentient beings. But he didn't stop there. After Vimalakirti says this, Manjushri says, what if you do that? How are you ever going to generate compassion? Right? Would you like to know? Next talk. Vimalakirti give 29 different perspectives on how to generate compassion on the basis of emptiness. Chapter 7. Go read it. But next talk, I'll talk about that. These 29 different perspectives are actually the ways in which we solidify, reify sentient beings and ourselves based on vexations. They're direct opposites of how we relate to people. These 29 different ways. Okay. So we'll get to that next week. Okay. Any questions? So what's the takeaway? Question. Microphone. We don't have microphone? Okay, just you can ask and I'll paraphrase for the Zoomers. Question or takeaway? All right, what's your takeaway first?
Well, that most of the vexation or all the vexations that I experience are just delusion in my own world.
Yeah, ways in which we actually, specifically we, which is different than other people. All the takeaway, this Corey says, all the vexations are basically ways in which I generate vexations, come from vexations. And I said that it's very particular, individualistic. So the ways in which we generate vexations tells us what needs to be done. Vimalakirti lists 29 different ways, but it could be innumerable. He just lists out the most common ones, 29 ways. So they show us what needs to be emptied. Where are we stuck? What needs to be released? Does that make sense? All right, your question?
If our experiences or the way that we react to them, including the vexations or all of the three hatred and awareness are simulation there in our own mind. And you state that through the practice, we've reached a state of selfless equanimity. Does that mean selfless equanimity is just another version of a programming to perceive reality of? But how do we know that that's not just trained to?
The question is, we speak about, all the ways in which we generate vexations, and we have to realize selfless equanimity. How do we know that this selfless equanimity, all the ways we generate vexations are just kind of simulations by our brain. We never perceive things outside. They're just our own mental representations. How do we know that the selfless equanimity, the selfless wisdom is just yet another program, a mental program that we train ourselves to see in the people? So recognizing that our vexations, where we are caught, are indicators of our own mental representation, right? Where we are stuck. Because not everyone will respond that way. It's just I'm responding to the situation this way. So these are indicators. Does not deny the shared reality of people. You know what I'm saying? So people are still suffering. Just because the Bodhisattva has woken up from this dream of selfing and othering doesn't mean that they don't recognize what people are actually doing to each other, harming, and to the world. They still see that. So they're still part of the world in the shared construct of this reality. So they're not ignorant to that. Because they're not ignorant to that, then they still engage with the world. Right? So it's not a matter of kind of all things are constructs. My simulation. Therefore, I don't need to care for the world or other people or even myself. It's not that. So this teaching on emptiness, it's actually an expedient means, right? So that we can engage with the world, we can actually do some good to the world. And in that process, we tap into our resources, capacity, and greatly expand that. So we're the one who actually ending up perfecting the Bodhisattva practices. You know what I'm saying? So you could say it's a kind of programming. It's an expedient means. Does that make sense? It's a very useful programming in that we have to engage with the world. At the same time, we're equipped with understanding emptiness so that we're not exhausted in helping others. So the Buddha has said everywhere that all of his teachings in the Lotus Sutra, every one of his teachings are all expedient means. There's no such thing as Buddha Dharma. Buddha Dharma only exists in response to the needs of sentient beings. If sentient beings, like Bodhisattva, who are engaging in difficult practices, what should we teach these people so that they don't become exhausted? Teach them about emptiness, right? So that they can engage with the world. Except this emptiness that the Buddha is teaching is not the lesser vehicle emptiness, in which just devoid this, get rid of that, apathetically. This emptiness means possibilities, right? Opportunities, infinite potential. New beginnings. Right? That's the true purpose of the teaching of emptiness. So nothing is graspable. Nothing can be settled to hold on to. Even emptiness itself, you can't settle on that. You have to leave it open. Possibilities, potentials. Okay. Any other questions?
I have a rather, strange question, I think. When you talked about the fact that in the monasteries, they were melting the Buddhas to turn them into weapons because they wanted to go back to Taoism,
Yeah.
did I understand? Why did they want to return to Taoism, and how would you compare Taoism to Buddhism?
All right, that's a whole other. So the question is, Emperor Udi, when he persecuted Buddhism during 9th century, melting Buddha statues made out of bronze and make weapons, confiscating temples, and change them into Taoism. Why did he want to do that? Basically, he wanted to be immortal. He had a Taoist advisor, right? And Taoism is all about immortality, everlasting life. So he wants to live forever. Like what do all powerful men want? Right? They want to live forever. They want to control everything. They want everything. So just greed. So he not only persecuted human beings like monks, nuns. At that time, the monks' robes were black. He even persecuted, killed dogs that had black fur. Insane. Insane. So as soon as he became overthrown, I think he passed away. His successor just kind of re-supported Buddhism again. That persecution lasted for several years. The intensity of his persecution. But anyway. So we are unable to take questions from Zoom.
Put the phone, people,
Yeah.
you can hear them right now.
So we'll end tonight with 2 questions, but we'll continue to go on this. 4 immeasurable hearts, 4 immeasurable minds. 2 weeks later, next talk. The takeaway is what? Emptiness. I hope that's clear. Have a good night.